There's their it's called Another Version of the Truth. Mm, love that
Yeah.
tune. It's
I saw
all
I saw the
symbolism.
all right. I got to get that cuz I listened to the preview, but it just shows cuz I do Apple Music, not Spotify, so I always have to search the song. And so yeah, I'll check that out.
Yeah, there's no words.
Oh.
Like, it
Oh,
really is all symbolism. You're gonna love it. You are not currently on Instagram.
yeah, I got to hit the go live. There we go. There we go. Sweet.
Awesome. All right. All right. And here we are for yet another edition of Dualistic Unity Social, another Thursday edition. I kind of like Thursdays, just the ability to do an early morning social and then kind of an afternoon social from time to time. Though that is going to be changing in the near future as we are introducing a new segment to Dualistic Unity. We are still working on our Masters of the Metaphysical segment. It is more difficult to get people who would like to come onto the show because if they watch the podcast, they realize it's not necessarily going to be the conversation that they'd like to have. But this new segment we are very excited about. It's called Being High with Dualistic Unity. And we are going to be featuring cannabis related influencers, people in cultivation, people on the forefront of research in regards to cannabis and cannabinoids and CBD and all that other stuff. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a fantastic series. I am very excited because each and every episode that we record, we're going to record high.
I'm likewise excited for that. I'm starting to enjoy being high a little bit more because it's really just the concern, like the concern, even just the concern for someone noticing that you're high, as if it's and as if that's a bad thing. And I get it because of the stigma of everything and all the crazy shit that's gone on surrounding cannabis and marijuana. There is almost like a underlying anxiety that you can feel to it just because there's such a massive stigma. It's like, oh, what are they going to think of me if I'm high? Am I going to be this? And even just the narrative of like if you smoke you're lazy sort of thing is so silly because that's what I grew up believing. That was like the main argument people had was like, well, it's illegal because it makes people lazy. It's like that's not a good reason to make something illegal, right? Like that's just there's so many things. Eating too much food makes someone tired and lazy. Like, are we gonna ban food? No, of course not. It's
Television.
just yeah, TV. Like your bed. Are we gonna ban beds because people lie down in them and aren't fucking working? And how much of that narrative of like work, 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 work has infiltrated things, and that's what I realized a couple of weeks ago was like with everything surrounding coffee and how much of a thing. I'm not saying like I drink coffee and I enjoy it, but there's sort of this whole cultural thing around coffee, and there's all these coffee shops, and it's just everything surrounding a drug. Caffeine is a drug, just like psilocybin's a drug, and cannabis and alcohol, and it's something that impacts you in a certain way. It just fits the system a little bit better. Like it fits that mold. And we were talking about normalcy and how anyone feeling like they're outside of the normal bell curve of society that's created, just fit in. It's like caffeine kind of fits within that because it's like a productivity drug as opposed to a relaxation drug. And we don't even understand the importance of relaxation. And that's something that cannabis almost forces you into. And if you're not relaxed, it shows you how not relaxed you are. But if you are relaxed and you smoke, it can be a great time. It can be a great experience. But it's just so interesting how even enjoying cannabis, like when I do enjoy it, then there's stuff in the back of my head saying, like, oh, what if I do this too much? Am I doing this too much? And it's like this concern. It's like, you eat food every single day. You're eating too much food every single day because there isn't really a negative outside of your own discomfort that arises from smoking or taking a gummy or doing whatever. It's just your own shit. You're not a detriment to society, though. A lot of times, people like the worst thing someone does is like sit on their couch and watch TV for a few hours. Like, that's not harming anyone, but it's not contributing to society and pushing the machine along. But there's so many things that put us in that spot.
There's a lot of stigma, and a lot of it comes back down to the mentality of, we are not responsible. It's the same mentality that says that, the problem with addiction is the thing that we're addicted to, rather than the mentality we're trying to escape from that causes the addiction, that creates that addictive behavior, because we're always trying to feel better. We're always trying to escape something, and that is ultimately how we perceive the world and ourselves and our role within it, and all of the limitations that go with that perception and everything else. And so the same is often true with the argument against cannabis. Like, oh, it makes you lazy. It's like, it doesn't make you anything. It just changes the conscious environment, as I've often said. It changes the way that you're thinking. It doesn't make you less you. In other words, if you tend to be, really, really driven all the time because of egotistical desires, because you're afraid to stop, because you're anxious, because you need to feel more, and then all of a sudden you get high, you end up in more of a meditative state, which is an alpha wave state, right? And you relax a bit and you realize you don't need to do all that, that you can actually just breathe. Somebody who's still in that state is going to call you lazy. And it's because they're still justifying what they're doing because they're not relaxed. And that's the funniest part, is that it really is just a difference in perspective. But it's the difference in perspective of getting really worked up about your thoughts and your judgments of yourself versus going, and recognizing they're there, but just letting them be rather than fighting against them. So it really just depends on the person more than the substance in a lot of these cases. People will argue against cannabis. It's like, again, what are people trying to escape? And people will make the argument against the teenage use of cannabis, but I would make the argument, what are the alternatives? At least they're finding cannabis as opposed to alcohol, as opposed to coke, as opposed to anything stronger, chemical drugs, any of those things. Like, let's address the problem in these kids' lives that's forcing them towards that escapism. Right? I agree. It's not the best thing for them to do in their teenage years, because they're developing, and so there's a mentality there that can become lazy, that can become escapist. But address the reason that escapism is there, right? Rather than just focusing on the evils of cannabis, as if we're back in the 30s and it's reefer madness.
Yeah, and it's always that for any sort of addiction, we want to focus on the addiction, the thing that people are using to escape, as opposed to what they're escaping from. And it's all like, you got to be able to look at what people are escaping from, the life they're trying to escape, the life they're trying to numb. And so it was interesting what you said in regards to thoughts and thoughts coming up when you get really high. It's like resistance becomes futile. And if you resist and try and control them, try and suppress them, it's like you're going to pay a price for that. You're going to have a lot of additional discomfort because it's not something that you have to do. And so when we're sober, like when those thoughts come up, they're not as loud. So we're almost able to just suppress them or avoid them. Right. And then when you smoke, it's like it's right there. So it's not about getting rid of the thoughts or doing anything with them. It's just letting go of the concern of them, which is the practice in it. But when we're sober, it's like there's more of this narrative, this illusion of control that I can just control the thoughts away, that I can have enough going on or enough distractions to distract myself from it. It's like smoking weed kind of just brings you back to realizing that you can try and distract yourself in a sense, but it's still right there. And so it's not about getting rid of them. It's just about shifting your perspective of them, which then shifts your perspective of them when you're sober, and there isn't so much of an impact. But while we're sober, we have so much more of that illusion of control. So it makes sense why someone who's heavily invested in that and feeling a certain way and being able to control what they do, that they avoid it because they're not able to suppress and control it in the same way while they smoke.
There's a good question here regarding, aren't there some negative side effects on the brain? I guess this really just comes down to whether or not you think the brain it shouldn't be affected by anything. And if the brain isn't affected by anything, then you should also look into the negative side effects of a long-term diet of sugar and grains and whatnot, or cooked meat, or any of that, because all of that affects our brain. It affects our biology. It affects how we think, how we act, even how we defecate. I mean, it's the reason that human feces is so toxic to the environment is because of our diet, which all affects our brain and everything else. And so you can look at sugar, you can look at pretty much anything in terms of it affecting the brain. So the question is, what are the effects on the brain? And it really comes down to the person more often than not. Like, I've met a lot of people who, again, when they smoke, they tend to relax, but their brain gets a little bit, quote unquote, fuzzy. And mostly that's just them not needing to pay so much attention to every little detail. So a lot of what they're comparing to is their normal, fixated, obsessed kind of behavior about being in control, about making sure they're on the ball all the time. So I wouldn't say that's negative, but it definitely might be perceived that way by somebody who feels better, trying to feel like they're in control as a way of dealing with their anxiety. That said, any effect that happens on the brain over the long term through long-term use of cannabis has been shown to wear off after like a couple of weeks of non-use, a couple of months of long-term non-use, and all of a sudden you're pretty much back to being crisp all the time. That said, you don't ever have to lose that crispness. I use cannabis as a way of dealing with high intraocular pressure. I have glaucoma. I have a particular type of glaucoma that is very difficult to treat. And because of that, I can either rely on medication or I can rely on cannabis to help monitor that pressure. And I do so. But that said, I work all the time. And anybody who knows me recognizes there's no difference between when I'm using cannabis and when I'm not. Like, I'm very much on the ball regardless. And well, why is that? Well, because I'm responsible for my state of mind. It's not like I don't smoke a strain and go, oh, wow, whew, that one's feeling a bit foggy, but that doesn't stop me from working through it. There's a lot there. I guess there's a lot that could be said for making excuses to some degree. But again, it comes down to that level of responsibility, that awareness, whether or not you're escaping, what it is you're escaping, because all of that comes with you. And the nice thing about cannabis is that it helps you process it to some degree, as long as you don't run from it. Because again, and I love to make this point because it's super important when people start getting all bent out of shape about the idea of drugs. Being high is synonymous with being relaxed.
Yeah, I always appreciate that one, and how we get so caught in thinking that even that statement that like, oh, well, doesn't it have impacts on the brain? It's like everything's impacting everything all the time. And so when you actually look at something like that, like what are the actual impacts on society? What are the repercussions? And it's going to be very dependent upon the person, but the overarching impacts are nothing compared to something like just alcohol, for example. Like we see detrimental impacts of that all the time. People getting aggressive, domestic violence, drunk driving. It's like the consequences are all over the place. And yet we don't look at that. Like when you see that like comparison between cannabis and alcohol being totally legal and super well available and everyone doing it all the time. And yet there's all of these like death happens all the time because of alcohol. But we're willing to trade that off. Whereas weed, like no one dies from weed. No one dies from smoking too much. No one dies from the actions that they take when they're on weed. Yeah, sure, you could probably come up with some like examples of things when they happen, but it's the percentage is incredibly low, and yet it's illegal. It's like why it's like I don't even understand how I get it and like all the past and the history and with uh hemp and cotton industry and all of that, but like when you just take them for what they are right now, it
It's
doesn't
the
make
mentality.
any
Like, that's
sense.
really what it is. It's funny. Bob Marley actually said it. He's like, they don't want you to smoke the weed because you'll question. It's like, question what? Like, what is the big problem with questioning? Why is that such a concern? Right? But that's what it is that all of a sudden you have the wherewithal to relax enough to figure out that you're getting fucked. And then that's pretty much it, is all of a sudden you're just like, this seems kind of needless. And they know that mentality, if it ever becomes the dominant mentality again, will change the balance of power. All of a sudden, the military industrial complex is going to have a real hard time convincing taxpayers to fund it so much. And like, there's a lot of differences that would happen if people just learned how to relax a little bit, which doesn't mean, everybody's got to smoke weed. But what I'm saying is that a lot of the stress and mental health problems that we're experiencing as a culture, if you look at the progression of them, how basically common it is to have what people would call a disorder right now, it is very much us walking away from the natural roots that we came from, which was the occasional use of these things. Like Ben Franklin smoked the herb. Nobody would say Benjamin Franklin was, lazy or squandering his potential. But it just comes down to this idea that it's something we don't understand, and there's so much behind it saying, no, don't do that. Like you watched Reefer Madness with me at the last retreat in Colorado. The idea that that was a serious movie is laughable now. But back then, for people who didn't know what it was terrifying. Right. And it's just the mentality that cannabis very much ties us into, which is a much more relaxed mentality. That's pretty much the biggest thing. Somebody was saying here, personally, I used cannabis for anxiety, but after a while, it gave me anxiety. Right there, I'm going to disagree with you. It was never cannabis that gave you anxiety. You brought anxiety with you. And over time, you let that anxiety, the thoughts that you're used to thinking, overpower any benefit that cannabis was offering you. Cannabis just helps you relax. It lowers your brain waves to an alpha state. So all of a sudden now you can have a little bit more clarity of thought, but that doesn't mean you have to. You can continue thinking about yourself. You can continue reaching for all the stuff that makes you feel like you're in control. And what's going to happen? You're going to feel it even more than you generally do. Anxiety and cannabis, always ask yourself this, and this usually helps. Was I anxious before I started thinking of a reason I should be? And immediately you'll go, shit, what am I anxious about? And then that's it, is that you come back to reality, but you don't recognize that the only thing you're anxious about is anxiety. You're like, I'm feeling anxious. Oh my God. And it's like, yeah, but it'll pass. You don't have to freak out about it. It's just that that's your normal response, is to try and avoid it rather than just sit through it, relax, and understand that it disappears when you're relaxed enough, which is why anxiety sucks, is because we're not relaxed.
Yeah, and so with that, because I go in and out of those sorts of feelings, but it's always a reflection of where I'm at. And that's just the passing of responsibility. Like, it's gotten so common to just foist responsibility onto something else. Like, oh, it's the weed doing it. Maybe it's just you. Maybe it's just you doing it, and the weed is accentuating or exacerbating the feelings that you already have. But it's not like you smoke and the smoke gets inhaled and it's like you're inhaling anxiety. Like, it's coming from you and your perceptions. And as Ray said, like, were you anxious before you thought of a reason to be anxious? Like, when you recognize that, it's like, oh yeah, it's just me coming up with a reason. And then feeling, or even it's just like feeling a certain thing, not knowing what the feeling is, saying like, oh yeah, that's anxiety because of this, because I have this thing coming up. It's like, you don't know that. You don't know what that feeling is. I'm not saying like anxiety isn't an experience that we have, but there is no objective feeling of anxiety. It's just we have a feeling inside of us. We have thoughts about the situation that we're in. We're trying to find a certainty because we don't know what the feeling is. We're like, oh, it must be this. Oh, it must be this. Oh, it is this. Oh, it's definitely this. Oh, it has to be this. And it never was that. It's just your assumption. It's just your settling upon it. And even the narrative that weed makes you anxious, makes you paranoid. It's like that's just another thing that we're settling upon. It's not, it's never necessarily been that. It's that you had it and the weed was showing it to you. It's like relaxation. An example is just like deep down we have some shit below us. And over time we build up all these layers on top of that. And it's all tension suppressing that deep down feeling. And so when we relax, a lot of those layers start to like crack or they open up. And so we feel all this shit that we weren't feeling before because we were able to suppress it, because when we weren't high, weren't relaxed at all. And so initially when you relax, you start to feel a lot of the things that you haven't been feeling. So I think there could even be a period of time where you start smoking more. And a lot of people probably experience that where they're like, oh, it makes me anxious, makes me paranoid. They smoke once and they're like, no, weed makes me paranoid. It's like, no, you just got a glimpse of what the fuck is under the surface for you. all the shit under the surface. You just saw it, and then you ran away because it freaked you out. But it's still there. You run away, you never go back to it. It's still there. And now and until you relax again, you're not going to be able to see that shit. But so there's like a period of that stuff coming up. But then once it's all come up, it's not to say there's like it exists in where it's just like, oh, it's all gone now. Like there's always some shit going on in there. And it's not about solving it or getting rid of it. It's just about shifting your perspective of it, which changes it. And then it doesn't become this, then it's not this enemy. Like those deep down feelings, we have a perspective that they're wrong, that they're bad, that when we experience those, there was something wrong with us, but there wasn't. But until you feel them, you can't shift that perspective. You can't change the perspective of them until you feel them. So you have to feel them. It's a component of letting them go. And that's the importance of weed. And so if you think that, weed used to help with your anxiety and now it gives you anxiety, it's like, no, you just are more anxious about things than you used to be. And weed's showing it to you.
There's a good question here. How much is too much? Like, how do you regulate usage of it personally? There's no answer that I can give you here because it really just comes down to you. I would say a good rule of thumb would be if you find yourself going, I'm stressed, I need to smoke a joint. Don't smoke a joint. Relax first, right? Which means stop taking yourself so seriously. Do the work, I guess is what I'm saying. Question your assumptions, question your idea of yourself, question all of that narrative until you find yourself relaxing. And then smoke a joint to enjoy that state of relaxation. Don't smoke the joint to get to a state of relaxation because that will not work for you for very long. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing is if you find yourself avoiding not being high, stop getting high. Right? Just so that you can get there and recognize like, oh shit, okay, actually I'm all right here. Right? Because that's it. It's taking the relaxation with you. It's not using it to stay relaxed. Okay, because there's lessons in the experience of cannabis that come with you for the rest of your life. What is the difference between when you're taking your life super seriously and when you're not? And I just kind of said what it was, because that's the difference between being relaxed and stressed out. Right? You're taking the details too seriously rather than the presence, rather than the moment that you're in. Right? So all of a sudden you get this giant narrative and it creates this tunnel vision. You need to get somewhere. There's the carrot and stick mentality. The whole thing's attached to that. Whereas if you smoke a joint, typically you just want to focus on what's in front of you, possibly cheese. So it's really about learning the lessons. It's not about the cannabis itself. It's about what the cannabis is offering to teach you in a state of mind that doesn't have the same strings pushing and pulling you if you're willing to let them go. I mean, the more extreme version of that would be psychedelics where they just cut the strings.
Yeah. And so with weed, then I'm curious, because usually I'll have periods of everything bubbling up. Like when I first kind of get high, and then I'm like, shift my perspective on them, accept them, recognize there's nothing to accept because there's nothing wrong, blah, 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 kind of go through that process. And then usually when I get through it, it's like a lot of clarity, like a fuckload of clarity. And I know that a component of that is just me, and it's showing me myself beyond the idea, beyond the story, beyond the narrative. But most of the time, it's like a period of, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes 5 minutes. It's like whatever shit is there, it comes up, I feel it. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm not going to get concerned about it. And sometimes I do, and then I don't. And then it's like, it's all me, and I'm just seeing myself in everyone, and there's no concern whatsoever. And it's that period. Like, do you find yourself going through that period, or did you when you were younger more so and less so now? Or I'm curious just
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
about
for
that
sure.
process.
So like I'll have periods of my life where I just haven't smoked weed, for example, for a long period of time. And I've been on the ball doing my thing, relaxing as best I can, but still getting into that pace, that pace where it's one thing to the next and you're really good at it. And you're like, yeah, I can do that. One call, next call, going to do that. That's finished. Next day, bam, 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 bam. And then all of a sudden I find myself with a joint in my hand, taking a walk, and I'm anxious to smoke the joint. And it's because I've gotten so used to that feeling of being on the ball and in control and aware of all the details and convincing myself of something that isn't true, essentially. Right. And it feels really good that I don't want to surrender that. And so then I'll smoke a joint and all of a sudden it's like wham, 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 wham. And I'm dealing with all of this stuff that's stopping me the rest of the time from being relaxed. Because that's what the cannabis is trying to do. It's trying to like pull me out of my tension. And I can fight it or I can go with it. But typically, if you go with it, then the process lasts a certain amount of time and you find yourself feeling super clear at the end because all you've let go of is the stuff that was clouding your vision the rest of the time. Or you can resist it and run from it, which is not very helpful at all.
Yeah, so that difference then, because sometimes I'll find that, like you were saying, without like with not smoking weed, there's like a sort of comfort, like you can handle whatever comes your way and you can do it. And then with weed, for me, like on our group calls, sometimes like going in, if I don't smoke anything, it's like totally chilling, get through it, no worries whatsoever. Like there's no concern whatsoever. And then I smoke, and all of a sudden there's like I'm like start being concerned about stuff and worried, and like even just in the conversation, there's more shit that just like comes up, and there's more concern, there's more
Oh,
like
it's always
nerves
there.
and anxiety.
See,
Yeah.
I would argue that it's there when you're sober, but that you have mechanisms to avoid it. Like you have a pace going that allows you to not pay attention to that momentary doubt. You're just like, I'm just going to talk. Right. And instead of just recognizing that doubt is there, looking at it and then talking regardless, which is why it's beneficial to slow down. It's not to avoid that stuff, but to look at it straight in the face so it doesn't have the same influence when you're not so relaxed.
So is it like we can convince ourselves that it's not there despite it still being there? And then if we're high, it's like there's no way to convince yourself that it's not there. Because if you can convince yourself that it's not there, then you won't really feel it as much, but it's still there. It's still having impact, but there's no wherewithal to understand it. And there's no like doing it despite how you feel. Like, oh, I'm feeling this. Fuck it. I'm gonna do it anyway. It's like, oh yeah, I don't feel that anymore. Like that's not something I feel. So it's not even a concern. And then you just keep moving forward without it, but it's still there. You just feel like it's not as
Exactly.
much.
It'd be kind of like, if you had I don't know, a pool cue or something, and you use it, you pick it up, you use it really quick, and you're like, there it is, it's done, right? But you never actually stop to pay attention to the pool cue. And so one day you stop, you actually pay attention, you realize that like there's all these little ridges and bumps on it, and that's why your hands hurt whenever you use the pool cue, right? But you're always using it so fast that you're just like, no, and that's it. You're not feeling those ridges and those bumps that have been there the entire goddamn time. I don't know why I chose a pool cue here, but the point is that that's what happens when you slow down. Is you start feeling the ridges and the bumps that you're ignoring the rest of the time, that are still hurting you, right? They're still affecting you, and so slowing down allows you to get a better feel, better sensitivity for what it is you're doing the rest of the time. Which is why a lot of us, don't want to slow down. It's because all of a sudden we're inundated with all the crap we've been avoiding.
Yeah, and even with that, whether it's sports or even just pool, like say you're going into a game, any sporting event, and you're like concerned about it. You're worried, a little anxious, a little nervous, and then you start playing and you start playing well. That's almost like the grabbing of it and just doing it, putting it down, whatever. It's like all those feelings are still there. You're just feeling like you're deriving value from playing well, despite it still being there, despite it still having impact. And so now you're just investing on the other side. Now you feel better about yourself because you're doing well, but it's still it's the other side of the same coin. And so that I think that's I'm realizing too is going into something and being worried about it and then doing well, quote unquote well, and those feelings going away because you did well is not overcoming them. It's just suppressing them because it happened to go on the side that made you feel good. Like it's not really working through them. So then, because yeah, you're not relaxed. So then, what is working through them? Like feeling it and shifting your perspective of it that allows you to go into it without the concern the next time. But sometimes when you do well After you do it, you aren't so concerned about the next time because you realize you could do it.
So what is it we're going through outside of just letting go of the judgment of ourselves?
Yeah.
That's really what it is. No matter what it is we're going through, it's the judgment of ourselves, the tendency to judge ourselves positively or negatively, right? Because if we judge ourselves positively, there's the risk of the negative. And then there's that creation of that fear and that anxiety and that tension, that need to be something, and all of that stuff. So it's the judgment that we're working through, the need to judge our progress, the need to identify. It's always the same thing.
Yeah, just the need to have any idea of how I'm doing and measure myself relative to how I'm doing, as if that exists.
Exactly. But that's what we're grasping for, right? How am I doing? And so there's our judgment. And that's what we're working through whenever we go through anything. That's what we're avoiding, is our own judgment. That's what we project onto others, is our own judgment. That's what we're always wrestling with, is our own judgment. And we put it onto the world and we go, oh, I'm scared of being judged. It's like, no, you're scared of yourself. You're scared of yourself because you think there's something there to judge. Right. And so as long as you think there's something there to judge, everybody can see it. Or at least that's what you're afraid of.
Yeah, so it's even like when someone isn't feeling great and they set up a routine and they start feeling better because they're starting to wake up early and they have a morning routine and they, go to the gym and then they go to work and they're building this routine. And it's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but what if all of that went away? Would you be okay? And if someone says no, then that's just suppression. And that's just a numbing of the feelings that are there, of the judgment of yourself. Like, you're judging yourself. And so you're putting all of these layers in the way of that judgment. So you just don't feel the judgment as much. And now you're building a positive idea of yourself because you're, performing and making quote unquote progress that you're always making anyway. But then we have these routines that are just a suppression of where that's coming from. But that's what we focus on. Like, we as a society push that narrative. Like, oh, you're not feeling great, just go exercise. Just go do this. Just go do that. And it's just like, you're not feeling great, just suppress that shit. Go do something else to make yourself feel better about yourself, but it's not looking at where it's coming from almost ever. And that's what all routines do that.
But it would be the end of our economy. I think we forget that, like, thanks to Edward Bernays and him using Freud's concept of the ego to develop the public relations, used to be the propaganda department in the United States, but also to basically recreate marketing as we see it today, right? We're all basically being catered to in our worst mentality. It's like, we want you to feel like you're lacking something. We want you to compare yourself to the image of somebody else. We want you to become this superficial shell of an idea that can be torn apart, that can be torn down, that needs to justify itself, needs to validate its existence, needs to feel better all the time. Thus, buy this shoe for $300 fucking dollars. Shit like that. Whereas 100 years ago, again, you would see advertisements and it would say, custom made shoes will last 40 years, guaranteed. It wasn't, custom made shoes will get you laid. Right? It was a very different mentality. Whereas, in the last 100 years, especially, we've started catering to that egotistical mentality. Thanks, Freud and your goddamn nephew. And so it's always about catering to this mentality, this idea of yourself that's always going to lack in comparison to something that you assume is better. Right? Which is why all marketing is based on the ideal of someone who has a lot of money, or somebody who has a certain type of appearance, or somebody who has a certain amount of fame or a certain amount of respect. All marketing is based on this idea that if you see somebody you feel is better than you, and based on however you judge yourself, you're going to want to be that person. And don't you know, I have a product to get you there. If we get out of that mentality, half, if not more, of our economy just dwindles to shit.
Damn. So that's why, you have celebrity endorsements for everything. This is not groundbreaking realizations, but it's like any celebrity, like attractive celebrity, rich celebrity endorsing, whether it's a watch or fucking toilet paper. It's like you now equate them to that. You want to be them. They use this, even though they fucking don't. And then you buy it because you want to be them, basically. And that's always what we're doing because we have this assumption of value. That person is more valuable. And it's even the phenomenon of like people taking pictures, or not even taking pictures, but like telling someone else they met a celebrity or they saw a celebrity. It's like value by association without even really being association. Like I feel better about myself because I said hi to this celebrity and it was so cool, and this whole thing, and it's just all this assumption of value, and through connecting with that, with them in any way, shape, or form, you feel like now you're more valuable because I guess because like, you know, you get a picture with someone, it's like the currency isn't money, it's time and attention. And like they gave you a little bit of time and attention, and their time and attention is worth a lot. They get paid so much for, you know, say they're a movie star for doing a movie. So like that 30 seconds of attention they gave you was worth a lot. Now you feel like you're worth more because they gave you a degree of time and attention. And it's so interesting how it's that. And it's always just that time and attention being exchanged. And, you know, say for a job, you give a certain amount of time and attention to that company, they then sell a product that other people pay money for, that they earned from giving time and attention to something else, so that they can spend time and attention on that product. And then someone else is advertising on that product. Say it's like, I don't know, a fucking video game or something, and there's advertisements on this video game. Then they're giving time and attention to the video game. And so then the advertiser is paying the company to do that. And it's all just time and attention is like really all we have. And we just use platforms like, you know, TikTok. I make a TikTok video, I give time and attention to that video. Someone else gives time and attention to the platform, and TikTok's the medium of exchange. And my payoff is an ability to reach a certain amount of people, which can then pull them into, you know, giving time and attention to something else that I'm doing, you know, a podcast, something. And it's always that we're paying for.
Well, it's all we're ever really trading, if you think about it. I mean, we say paying for, but money is just a way of symbolically representing the exchange of attention, right? Like somebody spends a lot of attention growing crops. You spend a lot of attention doing a job. You trade what you've got for your attention, what they got for their attention. So you're really just trading attention. It's really all you're ever trading, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just when all of a sudden it becomes for the pursuit of profit rather than, you know, the continuation of culture, the continuation of all of our ways of life. Like all of a sudden now it's about getting more and more and more and more and more, which means that you have to feel like less, so that way I can continue to buy all of these things that are going to make you more. And that's the problem, is that where marketing can kind of run off the rails. Is Bill Hicks. If anybody ever has never listened to Bill Hicks, go and check out Bill Hicks. He did this great bit on marketers. And at first you're like, oh, that's really dark. But he's really trying to get across the point that a marketer's job is often to take something that needs to be sold and sell it. It's not necessarily to think, oh, well, this is good for humanity. And that is the problem, is that we don't have that mentality. You know, Andrew and I recently started looking for an advertising sales agent for the advertising space that we have on the Dualistic Unity podcast. Because we have a lot of ad space that we've never bothered to sell or market, but the resources would ultimately help push the community. It would help us get into other community projects and things like that. And so we're looking for people to come on board. And one of the people that I interviewed asked, like, so it's just, you know, whoever we can get. I was like, no, not at all. Like there are certain things we just don't want to introduce to the audience because you wouldn't want to hear them. Right? Like you look at them and you're like, what is the purpose of this outside of to make a buck? It's not adding anything to anyone's life. And so that's something that we keep in mind when it comes to advertising on the podcast, is that we want the advertisers to get the attention, but only if it's worthy of attention. Like if you're offering something that adds to people's lives without making them feel like they're less for not having it, that's something that likely we're going to want to encourage, because that gives people an option without informing a need, without creating the perception of a need. And to us, that's more important than whatever product is you might want to sell, or whatever you might want to pay us for the attention that we can pass on to you, because that's all we're doing is just trading attention. It's like, hey, you're paying attention to the podcast, pay attention to these people. And we want to feel good about that, because that attention on them is going to lead to them paying attention to someone else, right? It's always ripples. The products that you buy give attention to those companies. And what are those companies putting attention into, if not just more profit and revenue, right? So it really comes down to not just what are you paying attention to, but where's that attention going?
Yeah, and I feel like there's such a negative connotation about advertising now that people just ignore them. But the reality is, if you're putting a product in front of people that can actually benefit them, like for the advertisers we're working with, like probably going to be some cannabis brands that maybe ship all over the country, things like that. Like people would very much appreciate that. But because it's been such a market that's been so taken advantage of, and market just like in the sense of advertising, that it's always trying to tell you how little value you have. Like you don't have value. This product has value. This product will add more value to you. So you need this product. And but that, like, advertising can be a very beneficial thing. It's a way to put things in front of people that maybe they could derive a lot of value from, not add value to them. And we've talked about this in the past with value. It's like we've shifted from giving things value. My car has value to me because it can take me from point A to point B. And now we flip that to, yeah, it still does that, but now it gives me value because of how expensive it is, because of how much money I put into it. And we're just playing this fucking crazy game of thinking that things give us value, as opposed to us giving all the things value. Like that's the reality of everything. Like it gives us we give it the value, not the other way around.
But you see, for us to do that, we have to be able to see that. Like we have to be able to see that that's the case. And as long as I have an idea about myself that I think is the truth, that idea is where I derive value from. And if my idea is very low, I don't have much value. So I need to struggle to get it higher. But then it's always in comparison to someone else who maybe has more value. And so always in this comparison game, I'm somewhere lower if I want to perceive it that way. And so it's so important to recognize that our value is immeasurable. It's not value that you're increasing when you go out and express yourself, or conquer something, or face a challenge. It's value that you're expressing. You're not achieving it, you're expressing it. It's always been there, right? You are value. Value itself, it's not measurable. It can only be expressed in greater or lesser degrees. And that's pretty much it. I want to mention very quickly that I think one of the reasons that I'm so excited to bring people on board with Dualistic Unity in terms of the sales position is because, again, I was a salesman. It meant a lot when I could find something that I felt I resonated with, that I wasn't just hyping up for the sake of paying my bills. This really is a good opportunity. And because there's nobody currently selling it, like we're just opening this up right now. If you have that desire to work for something where you feel like you are actually making an impact in terms of offering a discussion where people can just be themselves, be a bit more vulnerable, you're helping create resources for the community so we can continue to grow this, do join us. I will throw up the QR code here for the job. Check it out on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. And then you can book an appointment with us, have a quick half-hour chat, and I'm happy to explain the details of what it is that we're doing. But do get involved if that's something that you're looking for, because it is something that I looked for a long time, and I'm glad to be able to provide it for someone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's nice to be able to have an opportunity where someone, and I've never been a salesman or had that as like a formal job necessarily, but I can only imagine like you're given a product and it's like a shit product. And it's like there's that sort of back and forth you do, because it's like, all right, well, I got to sell this to make money, but I kind of feel shitty doing it because I know it's just like not that great of a product. But you come across something where it isn't that, and you actually have derived benefit from it yourself. And I'm not saying Dualistic Unity podcast. I'm saying just from the conversation, just from the willingness to question your assumptions about yourself. It's like, and now there's kind of like a quote unquote product that is all about that. And so I can only imagine how much easier it is to do something like that, how much easier it is to sleep at night after doing something like that, as opposed to selling some fucking diarrhea tea to someone that you know is just not doing the things that it says, because there's so many products out there. And it's funny how we have laws against like false advertising and stuff, but people are getting away with it left and right. And the most false advertising of it all is that it means something about you. They get this product because it'll make you a better person. It's like, that's inherently false advertising. And yet we're so confused and so caught up in the narrative and the idea of ourselves that we don't recognize that all marketing is false advertising. All of it is, unless it's saying a actual function. Like, here's a car that'll get you from where you are to where you want to be, from point A to point B. And that's the extent of it. It's not like this car will change you and get everyone to love you and raise your value so much, and it's just so worthwhile to do so because you're a better person for it. It's like all advertising is false advertising in a sense when you really see things for what they are.
Well, and then we become continuations of that false advertising. I don't even think that we recognize it. And what I mean is that, so advertising would have you believe that, depending on who you are, your age, your gender, the way you look, so on and so forth, there is, a way to look cool, a way to be acceptable, a way for people to look at you a certain way, certain coat, certain style, certain dress, you know what I'm talking about, certain way of cutting your hair, whatever it might be. And so now what you see by virtue of that being on magazine covers and billboards and commercials and advertisements and movies and everything else, it is a bunch of cookie cutter people. Like, you could look at a crowded street and see 5 of the same motherfucking guy. Like, it's the same dude, just in terms of their appearance. And that's the problem, is that all of a sudden now we're out there looking for a relationship, we're looking for a date, we're looking for the visual ideal. And that person's just learned how to be a chameleon while hiding everything that they really are. Because if it wasn't for that cookie cutter appearance, they would actually be dressed the way that expresses who they are, and you would have a better impression of who they are as a result. But instead, they know what you want because it's what everybody else wants. And so they just need to be that, and you will like them. And then we wonder why our relationships fail.
Yeah, because the people looking at them are doing the same thing, thinking that finding that person that looks like that is going to mean something about them. And so everyone's playing this fucked up game. It's such a fucked up game. Oh, God. Like hiding themselves from the world. And that's, once you stop doing that, you're more of an expression of that value that you were saying before. Like the expression of just what you are, as opposed to the hiding of what you are. And buying into some narrative, buying into some belief is a product of holding on to what you're not or trying to hide what you are, because then there's just more and more fear that comes up and more ways to avoid the fear, to overcome the fear, to mitigate the fear, as opposed to looking at where the fear is coming from, looking at all of the assumptions that the fear is stemming from. And we don't want to look at that, but it comes back to just letting go of what you think you have to be, thinking that it's going to mean anything about you. Like, it's what you think you have to be is never going to be what sets you free. Like, trying to be something is the experience of being in hell, is the experience of being in prison, and buying into societal narratives about the right way to act, the right way to be a man, the right way to be a woman. It's all bullshit. It's all just people trying to be a little bit more comfortable and find a way to just have an answer. There is no answer. It's just you. The answer is you, being you. And so if you're not being you and trying to find what the answer is and a way to be a high value person, then you're getting it wrong. And it's not to say even that you're getting it wrong, because it's another perfectly appropriate way of spending reality, but there's just like a fuckload of consequences to it. And it's not necessary because it doesn't even do the thing that you think it's going to do. Like the end game people are looking for is freedom, is happiness, is peace, is joy, and all that stuff. Just being able to be relaxed. You can't simultaneously try to be something and be relaxed. It doesn't work. So we're buying into this thinking that it's going to get us to this spot that it doesn't. Like it doesn't even get us to the spot. It's not even like a little bit of getting you to the spot. It's the facade of getting you to the spot. And so there's not even a like the trade-off doesn't even get you to the place that it thinks that it does, and it never does, and it keeps happening over and over and over. You see it with a celebrity who's, overdoses and fucking dies. They get to the peak. Everyone loves them so much. They're rich and famous. And yet we keep seeing it over and over, and we're like, why does this keep happening? Like, because we're looking at the wrong shit. We're focusing on the wrong stuff. We're trying to be free while we're imprisoning ourselves. We're trying to be free while we're holding on. Trying to be free while putting up the bumpers to life. As opposed to, like, freedom isn't what you think. Freedom is freedom from all of it, from everything you believe to be the truth about yourself, about reality, about other people, because it's always incorrect. It's always just based on assumption, and all of those assumptions are hindering your freedom. Like those are the things that are in the way of the freedom that you could potentially experience. There's not a belief system that you buy into. It's like, here's the freedom belief system. That's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. To experience freedom, you have to be free from all of those things, from your assumptions about yourself. In each and every moment, your assumption of what something means about you. That's what freedom is. Freedom isn't something that you get to. It's where you are right now when you're not holding on to so much bullshit.
It's freedom from the perspective of division, the perspective of should, the perspective that you must get to somewhere before you can have influence. But that's the problem, is that we're more invested in the idea of control than the actual impact of control. Or just like, no, I have it, and it's like, look at all the fallout. It's like, yeah, but I could just control more, and it's like there's more fallout. Regardless, I want to mention very quickly, because we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here, that we are at 500 followers on Twitch now, which is really exciting to me because we just started streaming to Twitch a little while ago. Thank you to everybody who has followed us on Twitch. We really appreciate being on that platform. We're now live streaming on LinkedIn as well for our Dualistic Unity Raw episodes on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So if you can follow us on LinkedIn, we'd really appreciate that, because we're growing our following, and again, we're hiring. We're looking for sales agents for our advertising spots. If that is something that interests you, don't hesitate to reach out, because if this is a conversation that you are finding has value in your life, and you want to help it grow, then there's no better way than to help the community itself and offer more resources to them, which is ultimately what our goal is. That, and we want to put a giant billboard in the middle of Times Square that just continues to repeat the same thing over and over. I am you are God, and we are one, for months.
For months on end. I can't wait till the day that we just get a permanent spot, a number of permanent spots. Like, imagine if that was just running in perpetuity for like 10 years in the middle of Times Square, like the biggest billboard out there with no branding whatsoever. I'm you are God, we are one. Oh God, that would be, I would, if I was in New York, just walk past that every day and just, because it'll inevitably get people wondering and thinking and like, what the fuck's going on? It'll be confusing because like there won't be branding. And people will just wonder. I'm sure like that'll be fun because there'll probably be like Reddit threads of like the I am you are God, we are one billboard in Times Square, and like all of these theories on like where it's coming from, who's doing it, why they're doing it. Oh, it'll be fucking awesome.
Oh yeah, and then we'll just be grinning like stupid assholes when they find us. It's like, hi, glad you can make it, for sure. Yeah, no, it'd be great. And the nice thing about doing that, of course, is that you're taking up a giant billboard away from some company that's going to use it for stupid shit, right? So if anything, you're just adding to the discussion, because that's it, right? Like, how many times have you seen a commercial, and I see this all the time, where there's a solid message, and then all of a sudden it's got a brand at the end of it, and it's for a specific purpose, and it's towards changing your view of that company and all that stuff. It's like, just make the message. Like, if you're a $1 billion company, you can't afford to put out a commercial that's just for the fucking sake of it, right? It's got to have your logo at the end. Why? And this is what I mean. Like we just lack that mentality that we're all in this together, that the ripples you make are important, not because of what they bring back to you, but because it's all fucking you. All right. So yeah, I'm very excited for that billboard. I'm very excited for the other things to come, including some of the community events and stuff that we want to organize, music festivals, ways to bring the community together, ways to empower people. It's going to be fantastic. So again, if this is something you want to be on board with, if you like talking to people, if you don't mind just researching people who are already promoting what it is they do on similar podcasts or podcasts that are in the same niche. So all you have to do is just find them, write to them. We'll give you a templated letter if it helps, and then just give them a call and talk to them like human beings and say, hey, we have a community of people that would probably really enjoy your product. How about you advertise with our podcast? And that's all you're doing. It's that simple. You make a good commission. There are bonuses. There's all kinds of opportunities in the future. Do definitely check it out if this is something that's interesting to you, because, I guess our point is to create such a beautiful work culture that you never feel like it's anything other than an extension of you and the journey that you're on. So we would love for you to join us. And we have about 3 minutes left. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who has joined us today. I love these episodes. Oh, and to the person who was asking, why isn't this a call-in show? We were kind of thinking about doing a call-in show from time to time on Thursdays. We didn't have necessarily a huge amount of interest. And then all of a sudden we came up with another segment idea, which we were talking about at the beginning of this episode of Social, which is that we have a new series called Being High with Dualistic Unity that's going to be starting, I believe, next week. So that's really exciting. So the Thursday schedule is going to continue to shift for a little while. We do appreciate your patience, and I have updated the public calendar.
Fuck yeah, I'm pumped for that because there's so many people out there, especially with the cannabis industry, just like picking up a lot of steam. There's a lot of people out there who, and it's a perfect opportunity for if you have a growing brand. We're already in communication with a few brands who may have some interest. You can sponsor podcast potentially, no guarantees, but potentially be a guest on the episode. You can share it, like there's so many opportunities, and it's very, very specific. So even those who maybe someone who doesn't listen to the podcast that much, but you want to see us being really baked on an episode and learn a little bit about a company or an influencer, and you're interested in the cannabis industry or just cannabis in general, like I'm sure we're gonna have some very cool people on because there's so many benefits to cannabis too. Like I'm just starting to understand how much beyond like the classic things you hear about, like THC, CBD. It's like there's so many different use cases. There's so many different, and from the hemp and marijuana. So is it? And this is I had a question with hemp. Is that so? Hemp is male and marijuana's female.
It's kind of an overly simplistic explanation, but yes, typically hemp is it's a taller stalk. It's more fibrous. It's used for a different purpose. It does not have THC as a main component, so you can't get high on it. Whereas you could, through propagating and mixing different strains and whatnot, get to a THC dominant strain, which is ultimately what's happened over time. But yeah, it's all basically hemp / cannabis. It's just taking different lineages, kind of like different kinds of wine in Europe. Different grapes and whatnot come from different areas, and that's all evolved over time.
Cool. Yeah, because it's a fascinating industry, and there's so many benefits that a lot of people could derive from. And I do see, I don't know, I'm even seeing right now just a shift in more people wanting to do that than drink alcohol. It's like there aren't the detrimental impacts. You're not a fucking menace to society as much when you smoke a bunch of weed, and you're not waking up feeling like a sack of shit in the same way. And it's not to say that alcohol is the worst thing ever. Like I still drink here and there plenty, but yeah, it's just a shift that it's not going to be the dominant thing anymore. And it's still, I find it so funny when people are drinking and then you smoke, and maybe it's like, I don't know, older school people, and they look at you funny as they're holding fucking poison in their glass. It's just interesting to see, but it I get it after seeing things like Reefer Madness and shit like that, that it's also, as much as it's absurd and like I could get frustrated with someone for having that perspective, it's like that was beaten into a few generations throughout the 20th century, that like this is this is the devil's lettuce. This is straight up one of the worst things ever, which is just fucking absurd.
Yeah, but you'll notice that alcohol is the perfect accompaniment to a state of misery, right? Like that's the whole thing. It's like, what's that? Repressing a bunch of shit. Here's a chemical that'll help you do it, and that's it. And that's why it's been so adopted by our collective mentalities, because we are in such misery. We do have such collective generational trauma that, of course, alcohol makes sense. But as we come out of it, we're going to look for things that help us heal. I mean, look at psychedelics. Again, the fact that psychedelics, particularly psilocybin mushrooms, I'm looking at here, can have more of an impact over your depression than any of the pharmaceuticals that are currently available under one use, possibly two, depending, right? And so, like, there's huge things that we have not looked at, and largely because mushrooms are free, grow out of the fucking ground. Like, they come out of darkness and shit, which is appropriate considering that's what we're trying to crawl out of. So this has been a fantastic episode. Thank you, everyone who could join us. We really appreciate it. We are going to be back tomorrow morning, 11:30 Eastern time on twitch.tv/Dualistic Unity for an episode of Raw. If you can join us, we would love to see you there. Andrew, man, as always, great conversation.
As always, it's been a blast, and we'll talk to everyone soon.